Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast Impact Missions. And in today's episode, I'm very happy to welcome my friend, Dr. Pascal Vuichard. Hello, Pascal. Pascal is a senior consultant in corporate sustainability at EBP, family-owned consulting and engineering company, and a senior lecturer at the University of St. Gallen, focusing on climate solutions. You'll tell us more what that means. Prior to that, Pascal has spent 4 years in Hong Kong, working in Deloitte as a director of climate sustainability and an adjunct assistant professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And you hold this position until now. And before that, Pascal has concluded PhD in business administration at the University of St. Gallen, that is behind us, on the topic social acceptance of renewable energies and electric mobility. This is how we know each other. And last but not least, Pascal has been very politically active always. He was a vice president of Green Liberal Party of Switzerland, member of the cantonal parliament of the canton of Glarus, and a member of the municipal council of the city of Glarus North. So a lot of hats. We will talk about all of that. But before that, how are you doing today? I know you are traveling soon, so hope that not to take too much time of yours.
Oh, thanks a lot, Jana. No, great to be here. Thanks for having me, right? Appreciate it. Very much looking forward to discussing these different topics, right? Traveling is not as important. It's important to talk about the interesting stuff and meeting good friends. Right? So,
yes, it's always good to see you again. Now more often because you're back from Hong Kong. But we will talk about it. And just going up the hill again, I have noticed it's very calm right now in St. Gallen. It's an off season in between the semesters. But you as a senior lecturer, you are still here working, preparing for the next semester.
That's correct, right? And I think, obviously good to use that time to make sure our services are up to speed, right? Good to see also the continued and also kind of very strong interest into kind of climate solutions as opportunities, and something very important to also be teaching at the business school. Right?
Yeah. This is coming up, and we have talked about it a little bit with Judith, and we'll talk about it with you in a minute. But before that, I usually like to start understanding your journey, where you came from, and what is fascinating about you is, of course, that you are a Glarner through and through. Do I say it correctly? Glarner.
Very nicely said, right? And we are indeed very proud of our cantonal heritage, right?
Yeah. Thanks to I have learned where the canton of Glarus is. I didn't know before. But tell me about the political system in Glarus, because you have been very politically active. But Glarus is a special type of canton in Switzerland.
Yeah, indeed, right? I think, being politically active in Switzerland is, in that sense, not super difficult, right? Because we do have direct democracy. Everyone can raise his or her voice and can join committees, parties, and run for parliament or any position, right? Now, the canton of Glarus, in that sense, is still a bit more different than other cantons, since we do have still, I would call it the most direct democracy in the world, right? Where we do have something which is called the Landsgemeinde, where we gather once a year on a big square and jointly discuss and decide upon all the important matters for our state, right? It also tells you that the canton of Glarus might not be the biggest state in the world, right? But that's something unique, which I think we're all proud of, and is of course a very, very good school for kind of trying to become politically active, as you have to create your arguments in a very precise way in order to kind of convince the people on the square within potentially 3-4 minutes where you get the chance to talk.
Yeah, and do you think that this system, what is the biggest advantage and disadvantage of this system? Because it's very specific for Switzerland. I think there are still 2 cantons, Appenzell and Glarus, that have this system, right?
Indeed.
And I know there has been a lot of discussions if it is outdated or not. So do you think that this is still something that is relevant maybe in today's world with so many political turbulences everywhere? Can we learn something from the direct democracy?
Even more relevant, I would say, right? I mean, if you look at the decisions made at the Landsgemeinde and the canton of Glarus, you would not necessarily think of the canton of Glarus being a very progressive or forward-looking state. tend to be more conservative as many other smaller cantons, right? But if you look at the decisions of the Landsgemeinde, they are very progressive. Canton of Glarus was the first canton to have labor protection laws back in the days, right? We are also now the only canton which has the voting rights as of 16, right? So we do also have the most progressive energy law in Switzerland in terms of, promoting low carbon efforts. And that's only possible because of the Landsgemeinde, right? And that's because people go to that particular day in the year, right? Always the first Sunday in May. And they go there without kind of pre-made opinions, right? So therefore, the opinions, the arguments, the discussion, the debate is very much happening on that day. Yeah. And therefore, if you're, well prepared, have a good debate, have good arguments, then you can still make very progressive, decisions, despite we living, of course, in a very polarized world, right? So I think it definitely has helped us in various phases of our history, and I'm very much certain that it will continue to help us going forward.
Yeah, like this really reminds me of this discussion, kind of the polarization on social media, that people are in their respective bubbles and being fed more and more extreme information. And exactly this, that you meet together and even people with different opinions discuss and communicate, that's very often seen as a solution, and you see it here for centuries now being implemented, right? So
true, right? I think, speaking face to face does have a value, right? But there's also critiques in that sense, right? So of course, usually, you can see what your neighbor is voting, right? So that is also being criticized by various institutions, right? So there is potentially some sort of a peer pressure as element to it, right? But in a world where many topics are very polarized, I think if you would go to the canton of Glarus, you would, from all the very left to the very right, you would feel consensus to keep this system, as it has served us rather well.
Yeah. And do you think that this system also made you more willing to join politics, because you have then been very, very politically active on many levels? Do you think that this prepared you to be more engaged in the community, in society, or what were your motivations actually to join politics?
Yeah, no, I have had it in the family. My mom was a member of parliament for many years before, so she didn't force me, right, to join politics. But I think, of course, it has been mentioned in discussions at home, right? But it was more kind of this, ability to see, your impact directly, or your action turn into impact directly on a particular day, right? Which you wouldn't have necessarily as directly maybe in other systems or other kind of democratic systems which we know of, right? And that definitely helps younger people to be more easily convinced that, okay, if I spend time here, I might have some impact on our society.
Yeah,
right?
And impact is something that this podcast tries to decode, right? So, but do you think then, because you have then progressed to be also active on the cantonal level, on the Gemeinde, on the city level, cantonal, and also national. So where do you think in terms of the politics you can, like, does the politics on these different levels differ? And where do you see you had the most of an impact, or does the impact differ?
Yeah. No, obviously in terms of, biggest impacts, the kind of national legislation, of course, is still the most relevant one, right? I think there is where we decide on, national energy policy, for instance, right? And that kind of translates into local code in the end, right? So therefore, that level of legislation is still the most impactful in terms of, setting the direction and be very clear in what you want to achieve, right? But still then my role on the national level was more of a strategic role, not as member of a legislative body, right? But on the cantonal level, we then also have legislative power in terms of translating some of the national directions into cantonal law, right? And I think there it's maybe the difference that we do have more flexibility to bring in certain specific things which we tried to research on back in our days, right? Yes. So you can bring in very directly insights from your kind of maybe more professional career into the political landscape, which might not be as directly possible on kind of a national level, right?
Yeah. And this actually is a very good bridge to the other question that I wanted to ask you. I have touched upon that with my previous guest here on like the political signals for renewable energy and sustainability. And of course, with the omnibus package on the EU level that has been scaled down. And what do you think in terms of the Swiss politics or cantonal politics? Are the signals here stable and strong enough, or do we still need more?
Obviously, we still need more, right? But I think, it's also wrong to say that nothing has happened, right? I think many things have happened. Many things actually have happened, which I would have never imagined, basically 10 years ago when we started kind of being more engaged in this field, right? So I think the exponential change which we have seen also in Switzerland in terms of renewables, mostly solar, right? But also on the electrified mobility sector, on the heat pump sector, now also on the battery storage sector. These exponential increases in terms of adoption, pushed by, of course, very strong policy incentives and directives, is something which is very good and which was probably not expected in that level, but it's still not enough, right, to address our targets which we have set ourselves, and of course to adhere to our international responsibility under the Paris Climate Agreement, right?
Yes. Yeah. And what do you think then would be kind of because Switzerland is traditionally not an interventionist country, right? So where do you think, what can the government concretely do more on the national and the cantonal level in terms of, is it more like incentives, or is it more just, like the carrots, or the negative intervention, or what would it need?
Yeah, I mean, Switzerland is a peculiar country, right? In that sense, great country to live in, right? But not always easy to manage in that side, right? But I do think, as Europe, and that includes now obviously Switzerland, I think we need to go towards a more incentive-based approach towards kind of electrification and kind of pushing the overall energy sector as a whole, right? And I think Switzerland has been more on the incentive side of things. However, as of late, it has also kind of maybe been moved towards a bit the other side of the story, right? And I think if we are getting back towards, more the incentive side, we are going to strengthen our own capacity and capability within the country, right? And I think we do not have the easiest political landscape at the moment, right, for this, but definitely with maybe more of the geopolitical elements which kind of factor into this, there is that would be the way, from my point of view, to not only drive kind of the journey on energy, right, but very much drive also our competitiveness journey, right?
Yeah. And you have mentioned the geopolitics, and I have been last week at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and there was all the discussion about geopolitics and Trump and everyone. Have you followed that as well? And what do you think? Are we really entering a new era, or is it just the hiccups in the traditional way of doing things?
No, I mean, yes, always interesting to observe what's happening at Davos, right? And following your updates, right? Now that's obviously very helpful, right? To get it from on site, right? And of course, good to read the headlines, but also good to hear what's the chatter behind the headlines, and that there is a shift in kind of world order that's, for me, not necessarily new, right? I've spent the last 5 years almost in China, and I think it's very clear from that part of the world that there is a change in how the world will look like, right? I think what's clear is that the old way of how we had it is not working anymore. However, it's also not very clear yet how the new way will look like. And I think this creates, of course, much tensions and uncertainty. And many of the of the wordings and narratives which I've come across reading about Davos, right?
Yeah, and this is exactly a good point, because I feel even the old way of the system, how it was set up after the Second World War, it was definitely not up to date with the current, the way how the world has developed, and we'll touch upon that when we talk about Hong Kong, your stay in Hong Kong. But so exactly, the old system was not responding to the needs anyway, so it needs to be challenged and reformed, maybe not in such an abrupt way what we are facing now, but there will be a transition, right? And it's just the question how this will develop. I'm always saying, for example, even UN has to reform, right? There is this like US exited so many of the UN organizations, but it has to evolve, right? To be corresponding the realities of the world.
True.
Just that the instability and the earthquake that is happening in the US doesn't have to be part of it, right? But maybe this is just an escalation of the change.
No, and I mean, we'll get a chance to speak a bit more about kind of China's role in this, right? But for me, of course, very interesting to observe how this is kind of being perceived in other parts of the world, where just if you look in terms of population size, etc., I think where the future of many things will, very significantly be kind of set and decided upon, right? And for me now, being back in Europe, it's also interesting to observe, what does that mean for Europe, and how can we be playing an active role in shaping this, right? And I think this makes it for sure also exciting for the young generations, for us kind of in academia, and to discuss these topics with various perspectives, right?
With the students, and this is a perfect transition to then talk about, you have left politics in 2020, partially also because of your stay and your trip to Hong Kong, and then your professional and personal stay in Hong Kong. But just before leaving politics, definitely, do you still miss sometimes politics, or do you think that there is a chance that you will come back to be politically active in Switzerland?
Absolutely. I think once a political person, always going to be a political person. Right now, that doesn't necessarily mean I need to pursue a role in parliament or in government, right? I think that the good thing about Switzerland is that you can be a political person without actually needing to have a particular mandate, even though it helps, right? So, very, very actively, kind of observing what's happening in the political landscape for sure, right? And I think there's also lots of changes since I left, right? Especially on the topic of media and kind of polarization, as you touched upon before, right? But that also led me to say, look, yes, very much interested still, but potentially then let's focus maybe on more local aspects of it, right? And I think there is much to do also on a municipal level, which might be less polarized, but still rather important.
Impactful. And this is exactly what we talk about. Where can you have the most impact, right? Or where do you feel that you are most driven, or your role drives you to? And then, since 2020, you have spent 4 years in Hong Kong. How was it to go to Hong Kong during COVID? When I was thinking about it, I almost forgot that there was COVID and quarantine. Was it like why was this timing actually to go to Hong Kong during COVID?
Well, the plan to go to COVID by my wife was already long there before COVID happened. Yes. Right now, sadly, COVID happened, right? But maybe I'm one of the few people to say that these restrictions which we had in Hong Kong, which were rather strong coming in, but within the city there was never a lockdown, right? But this whole quarantine stays and staying in your hotel room for 3 weeks before you're allowed to enter. I don't have the worst memories of that, right? Because it does allow you to calm down. It does allow you to do focused work, reflect, But obviously, it was not good for the city in terms of, many of the working class people not being able to, to sell their goods, etc. Right? So it was an interesting time. It was also directly after the last big demonstrations which were taking place in Hong Kong prior to COVID, right? So basically, we went as a city from the demonstrations into COVID, which definitely was an interesting time to start. But coming from Glarus, even a lockdown Hong Kong was a very exciting place for me.
From Glarus. No, it's always a perspective, right? Yeah. Like I was in Iceland, we were traveling there, and we were hitchhiking, and the person was like, "I would never live in Reykjavik. It's so busy, right?" And then it's still a small town compared to. So that's it. It's a question of perspective.
Indeed.
But in Hong Kong, you continued kind of in this multidisciplinary career that I see throughout your career, that you have been active within academia as well as within industry and consulting. And you have been working as a senior consultant at sustainability and climate at Deloitte. Can you tell us more a little bit about the projects that you have working on there, and maybe how do they differ from in terms of scale or scope compared to the projects here in Europe?
Absolutely right. And I think working in climate and sustainability in that part of the world is an exciting thing to do, right? In terms of the scope and the topical focus of the projects, in terms of spanning from climate risk assessments to kind of decarbonization pathways, where we look at where are the biggest potentials for companies to reduce their emissions and create value out of it, right? All the way to potentially topics like supply chain, due diligence, and the like. That itself doesn't necessarily differ as much from what we're doing here, right?
Yes.
Now, what's different is that the approach with the client and the company and kind of the mindset there is, right? And I think that's very much shaped by, of course, the region itself, where we, at least I tend to observe that there is more bold willingness once you get a buy-in to act, right? Which then is, of course, exciting to see projects roll out very, very quickly, whereas we tend to maybe have a more risk reserve kind of approach here, in terms of having more phased approaches and trying to assess and evaluate a bit more in detail, which also slows down the process. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And do you think that this is cultural, or is it access to finance, let's say, or where does it stem from?
Yeah, I mean, that's something which, I've been thinking about as well, right? I'm thinking we don't have a scarcity of capital neither in Europe nor in Asia, right? I think that access to capital is not the issue, right? And also, the business case for the solutions is similarly good on both sides of the continent, right? And I think what's different still is how it's being perceived, right? So for me, climate and sustainability in Asia is a non-polarized topic, right? This is a purely business strategic topic. Now, this of course comes if there is clear alignment from the very top all the way down to the local level. This also translates into rather clear signals on the corporate side, right? And I think, of course, the topic has very strongly benefited from this. Whereas, coming back here, I think for me that was probably the biggest. Well, we knew about it, right? But it's probably still the biggest shock in that sense, that there is so much, polarization around the overall topic of climate and sustainability, right?
Interesting. Yeah. And we are not yet in the US, right? Where it is really absolutely the last time I have been there was last year, where you cannot even say sustainability or renewable energy. That's already like black words that you cannot, or negative words that you cannot say. And why? So do you have, maybe don't, I also don't have the answer. Where did this polarization come from? Why did it become such a polarizing topic? If you can see that in Asia, it's because we saw it also with China going all in on electric vehicles, right? It's not a polarizing topic. So how come that such a clear topic as sustainability and health of the planet and health of everyone became polarized?
Yeah, no, I mean, different facets to it, right? But I mean, for me, it's still, I mean, sadly enough, it goes back always to the same topic, right? It's in the end, the economy which has access to the cheapest source of energy will lead the next era, right? And obviously, as the US, which is very strong on fossil fuel resources, lots of lock-in in their infrastructure, and clearly behind in terms of very critical technologies in the green area, are kind of now, of course, trying to prevent sectors which are, or continents which are very much focusing on the issue of renewables, electrified transport, not because they're greener than we are, not at all, right? They're equally green, but they see this as a purely industrial policy issue. And this creates geopolitical tensions, right? Now, obviously, you have now one continent which tries to hold on to the old world where they were the leader in it, right? And this creates tensions. And you have the other part of the world which has strategically invested into low carbon solution and technologies across the board, and is now starting to reap the benefits, right? Yeah.
Yes. So it's more like kind of leapfrogging as well in terms of the technology and trying to become leaders in the new world. But then, of course, like exactly, and this is fascinating to me because I see it in my work on the critical raw materials, exactly this access to critical raw materials as a strategic point and being fueled by geopolitics, but also fueling geopolitics. And now I saw the parallel also in the sustainability and renewable energy space. So this is the same thing. Indeed. Where you have the transition that is fueling the geopolitical instabilities that we see today.
Indeed, right? And then, if you go back to Davos very briefly, right? I think, obviously these geopolitical tensions feel even stronger because they are being accelerated by many other things, such as climate and energy, for instance, as you just mentioned, right? I think now, obviously, energy is critical to address our climate change issue we have, right? But it's at the same time, obviously, a very, very key driver for any economic power going forward, right? And this is now at a state where it kind of collides with many other things, which then also result in these geopolitical tensions, which we have at the moment.
Yeah. It's about access to energy, access to power as well. And power is sometimes in English as for energy, but also pun non-intended. But thinking about the projects that you have worked on in China, how can we can Europe learn something from them? There is something context specific, but what are you trying to bring something also in your current work, or what can be transferable?
Yeah, I think go both ways, right? I think it's not saying that in Asia Pacific everything is golden, right? Not at all, right? I think there is learning opportunities on both sides, but I think one thing which we and I really try to convey to the students as well, but also kind of in other kind of settings, is we need to be bolder again, right? I think we have been, and Switzerland is extraordinarily well positioned for this, right? We have the country, and our state in Glarus as well has been built by pioneers. They were not limited in their thinking, right? Now, what I see in Asia is this boldness and this risk appetite and this, very strong eagerness to innovate and be better. Not necessarily to beat other people, but to just get the best out of it in the fastest way possible. And you see that with many companies on the ground in China at the moment. And I feel that boldness, that aspiration to pioneering and innovation, we have lost a bit in the last few decades, especially also here in Switzerland. And I think if we can go back to this thinking and mindset in our companies, in our entrepreneurs, I think that will help us to not be somewhat squeezed in the middle between different elephants, right? But very much find our own strengths again, which have made us this great as we are today, right? And I think this is very much observable in the way companies work in Asia today. Right?
And why has it become so in Europe? Why have we lost this innovativeness? Is it because we are stuck in certain financial loops? Like, I know a little bit from the PhD, there is this discussion about, like, there used to be more monographies, more innovative thinking, and now because of the grants and the papers, everyone is stuck in kind of short-term production of papers that just get cited by other PhD students. But then, like, why do you think that, like, that the innovativeness, the boldness has been lost in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just one aspect, right? Obviously, but and I don't also want to bash regulation either, right? I think there has been good regulation, important regulation, which helps us to stay competitive on the green tech side of things, right? However, kind of, again, going back to kind of this now maybe more incentive and boldness related approach to how we phrase regulation is something we might have lost a bit in the past. But then also, I think, technologically infused polarization, which is something which is, of course, much more controlled in Asia, right? In that sense. Now, we can discuss the pros and cons of that, right? But here, I tend to see that, whenever there is a bold, innovative idea, then there is immediately also, the people doubting it and kind of and getting that momentum going, right? I feel like what we need is a joint momentum for, bold moves. And I think now, obviously, in China, there's a different culture, right? I think creating this joint momentum for bold moves is easier in such a cultural environment than it is in Europe, right? Yeah. But I think this is the only way forward for us in Europe.
Yeah, and globally as well, in a sense, because this is a global problem, right? And thinking about the teaching a little bit and your research at the uni, do you think that this boldness is also involved or present in the teaching and research, or would you, or how does this also compare to the research and teaching here?
Yeah, I mean, boldness in terms of entrepreneurial innovation, right? I think we definitely do see this at our business school here in St. Gallen. But I think what we definitely also try to convey here, and let me mention our managing and climate solution certificate, which we offer here at the University of St. Gallen, is exactly this, right? I think we tend to see climate change as a limiting problem, right, which kind of tries to take away stuff from us. But rather than seeing it this way, we should see it as, probably the biggest economic opportunity we have ever had. And I think that's something which I try to bring from Asia to Europe to kind of convince, yes, we don't want to be naive about the climate change issue. It's huge, and we need to be very urgently acting on it, right? But if we do it right, this is the biggest economic opportunity we have ever had.
Yeah. And this certificate I definitely wanted to ask you about, because the Climate Solutions is a great title. We have touched upon it also with Judith, but she's not directly involved. So great to have you here. But exactly, because I even wrote my master thesis on climate change communication, and there I exactly wrote my conclusion was that we have to communicate in a positive way, proactive way, kind of what can be done about it. And I think this is exactly what the certificate tries to achieve, bringing exactly motivating students to find solutions, finding these opportunities. And do you think that this is well received? I assume so.
Yeah, and I think this is also what we need at the business school, right? I think obviously we're not the technical experts, right? But we need future leaders which kind of bring this mindset into the corporates, where they will make the decisions which are relevant for scaling these green tech solutions in a few years' time, right? And this mindset is crucial to not only address the challenge of climate change, but actually, have a strong and competitive Europe, right? Yeah.
And in your current work now at EBP, because there you are also working on this, like, I think that for you, this, like, it very much complements each other, like the academic and the practical, and you can see it both ways. Do you see that in the companies right now, there are these skills missing, or are there enough people to be, or like, are the students from here gonna come to these companies and fill these gaps potentially?
Mac students do have great positions in the field, right? And it's great to see the impactful roles they take on, right? But obviously we need more climate positive leaders, right? But I think, what I observe now from kind of C-level discussions in Europe is now discussion sadly is moving, not sadly, but it's good that it's moving towards a P&L type of discussion, because sadly, the climate risks have materialized for many of these companies that they have either an impact on revenue or kind of capex increases because they need to kind of repair some of their assets, etc. Right now, that is where I want to have the conversation, because that's where the impact is going to be generated, right? The sad thing is that we have to let it get there before the impact can be generated, right? And I think what the students now have as a task is, of course, go into these companies and make the right decisions so that these, financial impacts of climate risks will not materialize as strongly as they might. And I think that's, the big opportunity they have, and a very impactful role to have as well. Yeah.
It's a sad thing that we have to see the negative consequences to be acting, but it's maybe human nature that we cannot predict or have a forward-looking view of future, right? That we would be acting before the negative things would happen. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe talking about this and trying to generate new generation of leaders might help in that. Yeah,
definitely helps, right? And I think deeply convinced that if we talk about where one might have the biggest positive impact in that sense, right? I think definitely inspiring people that this is a very lucrative and exciting way to go, right? Definitely has a big spread in the sense of impact, whereas consulting obviously also has an impact, right? But I think spreading this enthusiasm and this mindset which we need in our big companies in Switzerland and beyond is, I think, a very, very big task of any business school which we have, right?
Yeah. And talking about the companies and the projects you work on now, I wanted to check with you, because last week at VEF, there, in terms of the sustainability, there was a big discussion that the companies still go on, but instead of the greenwashing that we have seen in the past, there is the so-called green hushing. Also because of what's happening in the US, companies do not want to be bashed for what they do, so they kind of continue, but maybe on a low end. And secondly, there is a move from a basic ESG, just due diligence, to more systemic and nature-based solutions. Do you see that as well, or do you see a different trend actually, or in your projects that you work on right now?
Yeah, I think definitely the second part, in the sense that it moves towards, really kind of identifying, the areas where we can have, joint impact along the value chain of a company, right? I think, if you look at the core operational emissions and impacts a company has, many companies have a good understanding of that, right? But of course, where the biggest impact lies is along the value chain. I think that's where the most exciting and most important work is being done at the moment, is really to identifying how to best work and scale solutions along the value chain so that, you have your suppliers, which also reduce their emissions at the same time, which also allows you to reduce your emissions along your value chain. And I think that's where it's most tricky, right? But I think it's where many companies have now started serious work in it. The green hushing part, definitely observable, right? And I think, and funny enough, right, I think there's been just a recent survey on that particular front, right, where, we looked at kind of the backlash, green hushing side of the story of sustainability, right, which obviously is nearly to 100% in the US, as you mentioned before, right? Now in Europe, it has very much, picked up. It's around maybe 70-75% was kind of the result in terms of the survey, where leaders around Europe were asked whether they have this sentiment of backlash and green hushing. So it's definitely very visible, right? But the interesting part was that, the same leaders in Asia Pacific were also asked, and there it's only 25%. So there is no such thing as backlash in Asia Pacific, right? Also, for many reasons, right? As we just briefly discussed before as well, it's seen as a core strategic imperative for the region and driven with clear directives from the top, right? But it's interesting to observe this sentiment on the corporate level. And not to say, I mean, we do work, I do work with also companies which have European ties, US ties, but based in Asia. They still do feel it, right? Obviously, right? But what we can definitely see is that, investment is not stopping, right? Investment is continuously increasing. The share between investment into green tech versus fossil fuels is continuously diverging. So there is already more than twice as much investment into green tech than in fossil fuels. And this is exponentially increasing, right? So there is no such thing observable, funny enough, also not for the US, right? So if you look at electricity installments, new additions in the US power market, they were almost exclusively from renewable energy, despite the political backlash we have seen, right? So there is some business realities on the ground which cannot really be as fast overturned by politics, right? But then we do have the different narrative, which in general in a polarized world is not a good thing to have, right?
Yeah, but this is fascinating that there is such a discrepancy between Europe and the US and then Asia. But again, it brings us back to your stay in Asia and to the differences in terms of how the climate change and renewable energy green tech is seen. And what I wanted to react on is the supply chain dynamics, because me working on critical raw materials, it is really the start of the supply chain, right? Indeed. So I've been talking about supply chains, value chains for the past 5 years. So I was very happy to hear it when you were mentioning it. And actually now when you talk, because I always wanted to kind of divide the topics that we talk about, but your work is so complementary to each other that you cannot really make divisions, which is, I think, maybe actually why it works for you and why it makes sense and why it is so impactful, because it really connects one another. But then, like, when you are talking about Asia, that also was very fascinating for me to hear that you have stayed in Hong Kong, but you were saying, like, when I was in China, when I worked in China. And this, of course, is a very political topic, right? The Chinese involvement in Hong Kong. And so after 4 years there, how do you perceive that? Like in Europe, it is very often seen as like Chinese involvement or intrusion in Hong Kong democracy. But what do the people on the ground say, and what was your perception of that?
Yeah, no, that's a very, of course, political topic, right? And I don't want to advocate for a particular side here either, right? I think just want to share maybe some observations from my side, right? I think, firstly, on the ground, politics is not really discussed in daily life, right? So that's maybe also a big change for me, right? From being kind of discussing politics on a daily basis to not talking about politics at all. Maybe also because, of course, of everything what has happened, right? But Hong Kong always has been a business city, right? First and foremost, right? So business was always the major objective. Now, obviously, with kind of the security law and many new interventions, there is a stricter grip on the city, right? Now, before, maybe that's also a bit of a misperception, Hong Kong never really was a democracy, right? So there was always the majority of the seats in the parliament were set already, right? Where we had democracy, from our understanding, is at the very local level, right? So in the different parts of the town where they had local councils, right? That's where we had, basic democratic procedures as we know them here, and that's of course gone, right? So there is less, in that sense, debate, right? What we do have, however, is now a government which needs to act by policy intervention. And that's very new for Hong Kong, right? Before, it was laissez-faire politics, right? Because it was purely business driven, right? So it was the dream for any capitalist in Hong Kong. And there was no policy intervention whatsoever. And now that has changed, right? Now, obviously, there is now directives coming from the top, and that's something new to observe. And with everything new, also Hong Kong needs to learn how to best maneuver these policy changes and introductions. Interesting times right now. That's maybe as much of an assessment I will do here, right? But I think now as an expert, obviously, I'm not as touched by these things as the directly involved people, which obviously there has been not also very negative consequences, right?
And reception of that. But like what I liked from what you have said is also the get stuff done. And I think that at the end of the day, there will be always uncertainty and always polarization, maybe more and more with social media, etc. But then, and I have just seen yesterday an interview with the Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro, who was also saying, "I'm there not to talk about Trump. I'm there to get stuff done." And he said different word with S, but I'm not gonna say it here. And I think this is the same for us. Like we have to try, even in Europe or anywhere we are, to do the most in our roles possible, right? And not like, of course, we have to be perceptive of what's happening, but at the same time not to impede that from action, right? So we have to try to do the most we can in our relevant roles. This is what I always try to do, get stuff done.
No, that's what I learned from you, Jana, right? Now, obviously, that's great advice, and it's that's the focus, right? The older we get, the more we realize that's the way to go, right?
Just to do, and that's it. So like I was trying to really divide the chapters, but exactly like you cannot divide like the individual parts of your career because they all merge together. But just thinking about like your impact across these different areas, you have been active in politics and academia and consulting. You still do. You have been active across Europe, Asia. So where do you think you have had the biggest impact, or can you even quantify that, or it's not possible even?
Yeah, difficult to say, right? Yes. But still, I mean, impact in a sense is, the difference a particular action has made, right? And whether that's positive or negative, right? And I think now, obviously, I would like to think about positive impact here, right?
Of course.
Now, actions, there is good examples on consulting, but there is also not so good examples on consulting where I would say that particular project probably hasn't moved the needle as much, right? And the longer I think about it, the more I still do see the value in, spreading the word in a way which kind of, motivates and gives, the narratives, the firepower to the future leaders on these subjects, and kind of linking them with what is relevant in the business world. And I think that's what I see as my biggest impact, in the sense that, translating where the C-level discussions happen and what's relevant there, and linking that to, how can we scale climate solutions with that particular insight, right? And that goes then obviously into the words which you have all heard at Davos, right? But it is correct that, framing it as kind of access to resources, access to markets, resilience, market competitiveness, innovation, obviously is the language of these decision makers, which we need to have in order to get to the scale up which we need. And I think that's a role of the business school, and I think that's where I probably see the biggest impact. Right?
The biggest impact and biggest role for you. And with that, we will conclude this interview. But before the real end, if you have watched the previous episodes, or if you have watched the previous episode, you know that the rapid fire questions are coming.
All right.
Some of them are very quick. Some of them need a little bit more thought, but you have already, you are more than ready to give it a thought.
I haven't looked at that, but let's do that.
That's good, because then they are really rapid. So, sweet or salty snacks?
Sweet.
Very good. Mountains, hikes in mountains, or valleys and forests?
Always mountains. Better view, yes.
Very good.
Yes.
Jogging or gym?
Neither, right?
Neither.
Can I have one joker, please? This one
is... No, jogging. We used to go jogging together.
Indeed,
so
let's
I know,
do that.
jogging. Last book that you have read?
Don't necessarily, I don't know the title, right? It's from Remo Largo. It's about baby years, right? It's about learning how to raise a little daughter of mine, right?
Yes. Now we are talking about a private impact. Very good. Last podcast that you have listened to?
One I also recommend to my students. It's called The Angry Clean Energy Guy.
Okay.
It's a great way of kind of getting updates on what good things are happening in green tech, right? Which I need for motivation and enthusiasm. So next to this one, of course, that's another great podcast.
I don't have as many episodes as of yet, you see. So, but no, great suggestion. I will try. I will listen to them. And what is the last impact startup or idea that caught your attention?
Just had a visit from my family, which are all from the farmer side, right?
Yes.
And then we discussed one topic, which is red seaweed. Red seaweed is a great potential innovation, which can be used as a food additive for cattle, right?
Yes.
And then helps to reduce the methane output of the cows, basically in a natural way, right? So that was a big debate between farmers and me not being recognized as a farmer anymore in the family, but potentially interesting innovation. Right?
Very good to know. Good to know. And what has been your biggest mess up and how did you recover from it?
I don't know. There's been many mess ups, right? From, missed deadlines, maybe not as bad, right? I don't know, locking out my wife from our apartment and these kind of things.
Quite.
How to recover, right? I'm not sure, right? Maybe be honest about it. Don't try to blame others, and find a way out. And I don't know. Promise not to repeat that action.
Try to repeat. That's actually additional answer that I didn't know it was there. But solutions. You are giving lessons and lectures to the listeners. Very good. How do you define impact?
As I think I would go back to what I just mentioned before, right? I think in the end, it's the difference a particular action makes, right? Be it in teaching, be it in consulting, be it in any part of life, right? And obviously, we try to make that difference a positive one.
Yeah,
right?
That's why I said you are more than ready, because you kind of answered it previously.
That would have been difficult without that.
And last but not least, what is your prediction for 2050? How will the world look like in 2050?
We should have another 20 minutes on that one, right? But tend to be an optimist, right? Yes. I think, first of all, it's going to be a better one than today, right?
Hope so.
But I do think, right, it's going to be one shaped, and if we talk about green tech, it's going to be one shaped by electrification, right, in the end. And that means, electrification with renewable energy, access to it across the world, and hopefully also the US by then, right? And that allows to harness the great sources we have on this planet in a very economical way, and hopefully then also allows to grow in a way which allows us to stay within the planetary boundaries, right? That's my hope for 2050. Right?
Very good answer. And at the end of the day, if we weren't optimists, we wouldn't be here, right? I think that we have to see the glass half full, and I hope that the prediction will happen, what you are hoping for. And with that, I'll conclude this podcast. Thanks a lot, Pascal. It was super interesting, especially how it all matches in a puzzle for you. And I think that this is also maybe the most impactful thing that you can do, is to try to learn from one another and try to make a positive difference with what you do through all of your activities, not like only one and then within the others, try to make profit financial or something. So amazing. Thanks a lot. All the best of luck with all your next work here at the uni, at the consulting, and safe travels to Hong Kong. And
Thank
come back
you.
soon. Don't
Thank
stay
you.
as long as last time.
I wish, but I won't, right? Thanks a lot for having me, right? And
yes, and thanks everyone for listening. If you like this, feel free to follow and subscribe, and feel free to share also any of your comments. If you have any questions on Pascal, you can also follow in. You can also share in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye.